Welcome to today's deep dive, especially to you, the learner, whether you're, prepping for a meeting, commuting, or just like insanely curious about the hidden structures that govern our lives.
Yeah, and we have a truly mind-bending mission for you today.
We really do. So we're looking at a stack of sources today, primarily an audio transcript that applies these WK Smart Innovation Corporate principles to romance.
Right, along with a visual schema that kind of maps out how all of this affects global society as a whole.
Exactly. And our goal today, we are going to completely dismantle the deeply ingrained cultural idea that love is just this random magical event.
I mean, we're essentially decoding it into a dynamic systemic process, like relational engineering that, according to these sources, could literally save society.
Which is a massive, massive intellectual leap.
Yeah.
Taking frameworks meant for boardrooms and dropping them right into the bedroom.
It really is, but it fundamentally rewrites how we understand human connection.
It does.
Yeah.
And to illustrate just how jarring this rewrite is, I want to paint a picture for you listening. So, imagine you are on the perfect candlelit first date.
Oh, setting the scene. I like it.
Right. The atmosphere is flawless. You're sitting across from someone incredibly charming. The conversation is flowing. The wine is excellent. You lean in, maybe expecting to ask about their favorite movie or, I don't know, their travel plans.
Like you normally would.
Right. But instead, your date reaches into their bag and pulls out a mathematically weighted spreadsheet, like a printed matrix.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And they look you dead in the eye and explain that they need to verify if your, quote, inescapable interests align past a highly specific 51% threshold.
Before they even consider ordering dessert. Right.
Exactly. Before dessert.
I mean, for almost anyone, that is the ultimate mood killer. You would probably ask for the check and immediately run for the door.
Completely. It sounds like a clinical, unromantic sci-fi dystopia.
Yeah.
You fail the math test, the relationship is instantly terminated.
Yeah.
But, okay, let's unpack this.
Because as cold and calculating as that spreadsheet seems on the surface, the materials we're analyzing today argue something entirely different.
Right. They argue that this utterly ruthless mathematical approach is actually the key to an incredibly powerful invisible infrastructure.
Yeah, and the word infrastructure is really the anchor point here. I mean, when society thinks of the infrastructure required to build a functioning, thriving world, we usually default to the tangible stuff, right?
Like concrete highways, steel bridges, power grids.
Exactly. Or, vast networks of fiber optic cables. We look for these macro foundations engineered by governments or massive tech hubs.
But these sources just throw that entirely out the window. They propose that the most crucial infrastructure on the planet doesn't come from a government mandate at all.
It comes from the bottom up.
Right. They argue the absolute smallest, most complex unit of society, which is the romantic couple, is actually the ultimate infrastructure.
Right. By positioning the couple as the strategic engine for global societal well-being, the text kind of forces us to stop looking at intimate feelings as purely instinctual passive events.
Because when you start treating intimacy as a dynamic, engineered system, you suddenly gain the power to actually manage it.
Which brings us to the core of the whole thing. To even begin to understand how a clinical spreadsheet could ever be considered romantic, we have to completely change our baseline paradigm of what a relationship actually is.
Oh, definitely. And the text uses an analogy that I found, honestly, just painfully relatable. It points out that most of us treat a relationship like a succulent plant.
Yes, the classic potted plant on the windowsill.
Right. Think about the psychology behind that. You buy a succulent, you put it on the living room windowsill, you give it a splash of water whenever you happen to remember. And
It's across your fingers and hope for the best.
Exactly. You just rely on its inherently resilient nature to keep it alive. And if a few months pass and it shrivels up and dies, what do?
We shrug.
Yeah, we tell our friends, well, I guess I just didn't have a green thumb for that relationship. It just wasn't meant to be.
It's a complete and total avoidance of active responsibility. It allows us to be passive passengers in our own lives.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But the visual schema we're looking at argues for the exact opposite approach.
Yeah.
A relationship is not a plant. It is a highly complex, heavily trafficked operating system.
And you cannot just install a new OS and walk away. It demands rigorous, continuous maintenance.
Right. You need constant patches to close security vulnerabilities. You need software updates to handle new applications.
And crucially, you need continuous monitoring of the error logs to prevent a catastrophic system crash.
Yeah, and reading through the schema, I see this operating system is built on 3 foundational pillars. Could you break down how those tracks actually function?
Yeah, I can, and it's fascinating how structurally dependent they are on each other. So, the architecture of relational innovation begins with the first pillar, which is willpower.
Okay, willpower.
But we have to strip away the poetic definition here. The texts don't define willpower as a vague, fuzzy affection or like a feeling of fondness.
They define it as pure transformative energy.
Right. It is the raw thermonuclear driving force that prevents a biological system or an individual from collapsing under the extreme stress of daily life.
So willpower is basically the fuel.
Exactly, the fuel. But fuel needs direction, which brings us to the second pillar, which is method.
The method.
Yeah, the method provides the structural tracks. If willpower is the engine, method is the steering mechanism.
Oh, I see. So it channels that raw energy to guide communication, establish boundaries, things like that.
Exactly, and to stop inevitable conflicts from becoming fundamentally destructive. And then finally, you have the third pillar, awareness.
Awareness.
This is the lucid, clear-eyed ability to read reality. It's your capacity to look at the context you're in, recognize your own biases, and use the method to evolve together rather than just, reacting blindly.
I have to push back here a little bit. On behalf of anyone listening who still believes in the magic of a spontaneous spark,
Sure, go for it.
doesn't putting love into a flowchart and applying a strict method sterilize the whole experience? Like, doesn't this heavy, corporate-sounding architecture suffocate the unpredictable fire that makes romance actually romantic?
Well, it is a completely logical fear. The idea of scheduling intimacy or structuring an argument feels totally antithetical to passion.
It really does.
But the documents counter this by applying a basic rule of thermodynamics. So think of that passion, that willpower we just discussed, as the thermal energy of a fire.
Okay, fire.
Without that fire, there's no heat, there's no light, there's no life. It is absolutely essential. But uncontrolled thermal energy is inherently dangerous.
Right, an uncontrolled fire in the middle of your living room just burns the entire house to the ground.
Precisely. So the method isn't a bucket of water that you throw on the flames to extinguish them. The method is the fireplace.
Oh, wow, the fireplace.
Yes. It is the meticulously built brick architecture that allows that incredible fire to burn safely. It contains the danger, so the fire can warm the entire house without reducing your life to ashes.
That makes so much sense. So in practice, this fireplace might be an agreed-upon rule that you don't litigate financial stress after 10 o'clock at night when you're both just exhausted.
Exactly. It contains the heat.
I love how that reframes the concept of a crisis. Because in a normal narrative, a massive fight or a period of emotional distance feels terminal. It feels like a cracked vase that will never look the same.
Right. It feels like the end.
But with this structured architecture, a system crash is viewed completely differently. The schema actually calls it a bifurcation point.
Yeah, if we look at the mechanics of a tech startup, the parallel is really flawless here. When a startup hits a major crisis, it doesn't automatically mean bankruptcy.
Right. It usually just indicates that the market environment has changed.
Exactly. Their current operational model is no longer viable. They've reached a bifurcation point, so they have two choices. Keep doing the identical thing and die, or innovate.
They pivot.
Yes, they pivot. They evolve their internal processes to survive the new environment.
So the devastating argument isn't the beginning of the end. It's actually a mechanical trigger, forcing the relationship to level up.
Provided, of course, that both people use the method and the awareness to navigate that pivot instead of just burning the house down.
Right. That is the critical caveat.
Yeah.
But acknowledging that this fireplace architecture is absolutely necessary to survive a crisis brings us to an immediate daunting problem.
Which is?
How do you rigorously ensure you are handing the bricks to the right person?
Yes. Which pulls us right back to that brutal date night spreadsheet we started with.
Exactly. Because the sources lay out a ruthless 5-day assessment to solve this exact problem. It's a 4-column stress test designed to strip away all those romantic illusions and force you to look at the hard, quantifiable data of who you are.
It is intense. We should probably walk the listener through this.
Yeah, let's do it. So column 1, you list your inescapable goals, the vital, visceral needs you absolutely will not compromise on, regardless of how charming the person sitting across from you is.
Right. And then column 2, you rank them hierarchically, top priority all the way down to the bottom.
Now, On the surface, that just sounds like a standard journaling exercise.
It does, but column 3 is where the psychology gets intensely surgical. You are given exactly 100 percentage points to distribute among these goals.
Right. You have to mathematically quantify the weight of your desires,
Hmm.
which human beings naturally hate doing.
Because it forces us to admit our finite capacity.
We want to believe we can have everything at 100%. But the texts give these brilliant, extreme examples of how limiting our anatomy actually is.
Yeah, like the rural woman example.
Imagine a woman with a deep-rooted rural background whose ultimate defining life goal is to build a traditional family and a secure, quiet nest. In her 100% capacity, that single goal might consume 90% of her entire value system. Everything else, career, travel, hobbies, is just a fractional 10% sliver.
And then contrast her structural anatomy with the other example they provide, which is a high-level corporate manager.
Right, totally different.
Her life is a whirlwind of intense professional demands. Her 100% is entirely fragmented across career advancement, international networking, and constant mobility.
To the point where, mathematically, there is literally 0% left to accommodate the emotional and temporal needs of a stable partner.
Exactly. She physically does not have the bandwidth.
It's basically an anatomy of desire. You only have so much blood to pump to different organs. And once you realize your own anatomical limits with those 100 points, the immediate painful hurdle is figuring out if the person you're with actually fits into them.
Which brings us to the final step.
All right, column 4, the radar. Next to every single weighted goal, you write down the name of the instinctual go-to person you would call to help you achieve it. And here is the true test. You take your partner's name and you force it into every row.
Right.
But I'm a bit fuzzy on how this translates to an actual pass or fail metric. How does the math actually validate the relationship?
Well, you have to ask yourself with brutal, crystalline honesty, does it make logical sense for this specific person to support me in this 30% goal?
Like, do they actually have the competency for it?
Exactly. Do they actually possess the emotional or practical competency to be my ally here? For example, if your 30% goal is building a startup and your partner is incredibly risk-averse and craves stability, forcing their name into that row is just a lie.
Right.
If you sum up the weights of the goals where your partner naturally, productively fits without forcing it, and that sum hits at least 51%, the system is mathematically validated. You have found your ally.
Okay, let's unpack this because here's where it gets really interesting. This 51% algorithm is essentially the exact mechanism behind corporate mergers and acquisitions.
Yes, the text draws this parallel directly.
When two giant companies merge, they're looking for synergies in their core business. The absolute majority, the 51%. But to make an M&A successful, they have to ruthlessly cut the dead weight.
Someone has to give up the corner office.
Exactly. A secondary product line has to be liquidated to fund the core integration.
And the psychological friction here is immense because the corollary to this validation is the hardest part of the entire framework.
The sacrifice.
Yes. If you have secured that 51% of your vital, inescapable needs, you must willingly sacrifice your marginal interests, the remaining 49%.
Wow.
The sacrifice of the margin is the absolute non-negotiable price for dominating the core business.
Just think about what that actually looks like in practice. Sacrificing the 49% might mean you permanently abandon your dream of living in a quiet mountain town because your partner's 30% goal requires living in a major financial hub.
You compromise on the fractions to ensure the whole entity survives.
It is a bilateral pact. So if you're listening right now, think about what your 100% looks like. If you instinctively filled out that fourth column next to your most visceral passions, would the name of the person sleeping next to you actually appear?
Or are you forcing it?
Right. It is a wildly uncomfortable truth to dig for.
Highly uncomfortable because it removes the safety net of, we'll just figure it out later, but let's assume you pass the test.
You hit the 51%.
Yeah. You hit the 51%, you have the method, you have the willpower, you successfully merge the companies. The inherent problem is that this newly formed system does not exist in a vacuum.
Oh, definitely not.
The moment the merger is complete, it is immediately bombarded by the relentless chaos of reality.
Mortgages, job stress, sleep deprivation, family drama, the endless entropy of daily life.
Which is precisely why the visual schema introduces a framework of systemic relational innovation to handle this entropy.
Right.
It breaks the ecosystem down into 3 phases: input, process, and impact. The input is the massive volume of chaotic data bombarding the relationship daily.
That could be macroeconomic stress, societal pressure, or, the invisible weight of unresolved childhood trauma that gets triggered by a throwaway comment.
Exactly. And the couple acts as a biological transformer in the process phase. They have to take that chaotic input and, using their structured communication tracks, process it so the relationship doesn't derail.
But the truly revolutionary and honestly shocking leap happens in how the sources say we should facilitate this process. They introduce a highly controversial enabler here.
Yes. Empathetic artificial intelligence.
It is the ultimate collision of technology and intimacy. And I have to admit, when I first read this section, my instinctual reaction was sheer repulsion. Oh yeah, the idea of delegating my intimate feelings to a machine algorithm feels totally alienating. It feels like outsourcing my humanity. The idea of a piece of software acting as an omnipresent marriage counselor in my pocket just felt wrong.
I mean, it sounds incredibly dystopian on the surface. We are already so monitored by algorithms. Inviting one into our emotional baseline feels like crossing a final boundary. So
Yeah.
how did the sources convince you otherwise?
Well, they used this brilliant analogy that completely reframed the mechanism for me. It's not a robot feeling things for you, and it's not a program telling you what to do. It actually functions as an emotional spell checker.
An emotional spell checker
Yeah.
that perfectly captures the utility without the dystopia.
Right.
It isn't magic, it is pure behavioral data analysis. Let's look at how this operates practically. The AI runs quietly in the background of your digital platforms.
Okay.
It reads communication patterns over time. It might notify you that over the last 3 days, the vocabulary in your text messages to your partner has become increasingly passive-aggressive.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it might flag a sudden spike in absolute terms like "you always" or "you never."
And according to the schema, it goes way beyond just text. If you connect the system to modern wearables, it tracks heart rate variability. It maps changes in skin conductance.
It listens to the microaccelerations in the tone of your voice.
Right. It acts as a preemptive early warning system. It catches the invisible symptom, the underlying spike in physiological stress or the aggressive pronoun usage, and flags the blind spot for you before it turns into a massive plate-throwing fight at 3 in the morning.
Because why do couples usually fight at 3 in the morning? It's rarely about the immediate trigger.
It's because 50 small, invisible irritations compounded over a week without either person realizing it.
Exactly. The algorithm makes the invisible visible. It operates as a rearview mirror for your emotional blind spots. But, and this is a crucial distinction, it does not do the hard work for you.
Right. The algorithm doesn't apologize for you. It can't generate genuine remorse. If you are blinded by the smoke of your own anger, the machine just holds up the mirror.
You still have to do the work.
Swallowing your pride, sitting down at the kitchen table, and actually using the method to repair the breach. That remains the exclusive, painful, irreplaceable job of the human beings.
Taking that a step further, it forces a macro-level question,
Right.
right? Why go to all this trouble?
Yeah, why apply intense corporate-level rigor, stress tests, and sophisticated AI tracking to a simple domestic partnership? Why not just let couples be messy?
The answer, according to the right side of our visual schema, is monumental. It is the butterfly effect of relational innovation.
Because an argument resolved in your kitchen doesn't just stay in your kitchen.
Far from it. The schema maps out an astonishing chain of biological and societal causality. Let's trace it. Imagine a validated couple who successfully uses these tools to communicate empathetically.
Okay.
That emotionally secure environment creates a neurologically calm individual. Because they aren't engaged in a low-level chronic domestic war, they wake up in the morning with drastically lower levels of cortisol, the primary stress hormone that governs our fight-or-flight response.
And lower cortisol directly correlates to improved cognitive function and decision-making capacity. So, let's say that neurologically calm person goes to work. Maybe they are a VP of operations.
Right.
Because they aren't carrying the toxic, unresolved residue of a screaming match from the night before. They don't dump aggressive, displaced frustration onto their middle managers. They have the patience to handle a logistical crisis constructively.
Which means the middle managers don't panic and scream at the supply chain team. This emotional stability cascades downward, immediately creating healthier professional environments.
It leads to higher global productivity, lower employee turnover, and a massive plummet in healthcare costs associated with anxiety and psychosomatic disorders.
The couple ceases to be just two people in a house. They become an active engine pumping systemic well-being into the broader society.
But There is a really dark side to this coin, too, because the reverse contagion is equally powerful. Chronic relational dysfunction creates isolated, rancorous people who are constantly on the defensive.
And that emotional fragility spreads like a virus.
It infects everyone they interact with. It affects the exhausted factory worker operating dangerous machinery, and it affects the high-level politician who literally has their finger on the button of the national economy or defense strategy.
Unresolved domestic conflict is the literal root of systemic inefficiency and social polarization.
Wow.
The dysfunction bleeds out of the house, into the streets, and infects our institutions. And looking at the broader issue of polarization, the sources target the ultimate ambition of this entire philosophy, rewiring our digital social networks.
Oh, that's huge.
Yeah. Currently, the algorithms governing social media are fundamentally trained to monetize outrage. An angry, defensive person clicks, shares, and comments far more frequently than a peaceful person.
It's a virtual gladiator arena designed to keep us agitated.
But imagine if sociologists and engineers took this empathetic AI framework, these specific metrics of relational well-being and conflict resolution, and injected them directly into the core code of our global networks.
Oh, instead of an algorithm pushing content that triggers your fight-or-flight response,
Yeah.
what if the platform rewarded constructive listening?
Exactly. What if it amplified digital behavior that successfully de-escalated conflict? We could transform social media from engines of outrage into global infrastructures of societal well-being.
So what does this all mean for us? We have gone on a dizzying journey today. We started by completely dismantling the fairy tale idea of romantic destiny, replacing it with a brutal 51% M&A spreadsheet to find a true ally.
We learned that raw passion needs the structured fireplace of a rigorous method so it doesn't burn the house down when a crisis hits.
We explored installing an AI emotional rearview mirror to check our passive aggressiveness before it compounds. And ultimately, we realized that the specific way you treat your partner on a Tuesday night is the exact same mechanism that influences the peace and economic efficiency of the entire globe.
It's incredible.
I really want you listening to ask yourself, how could treating your own intimacy as an innovation lab literally hold up the world?
It is a breathtaking vision of total human optimization. However, there is one final, chilling reflection hidden deep in the source text that we need to leave our listener with today.
What's that?
If we actually embrace this optimized future-like, if we start relying heavily on empathetic AI frameworks to constantly notify us of our passive aggressiveness, and algorithms to map out exactly how to resolve conflicts with the people we love, do we face an invisible danger?
Uh-oh.
If we consistently delegate this heavy emotional labor to a software crutch, will our internal empathetic muscles begin to atrophy?
Oh, wow. Like relying on GPS so much that you completely lose the spatial awareness to navigate your own neighborhood.
Exactly the same biological principle. Could we wake up one day having completely forgotten how to be genuinely, intuitively compassionate simply because there wasn't a digital notification on a screen reminding us to do so?
That is a staggering thought to end on. It perfectly highlights this bizarre paradox of total optimization, what it actually means to remain truly human and truly capable of organic love in an era where we can engineer absolutely everything.
It's something to think about.
Definitely. The next time you're sitting across a candlelit table and the conversation is flowing perfectly, maybe ask yourself what your spreadsheet really looks like and whether you're ready to build the fireplace. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.